What started as an ordinary night turned into something Sarah never could have imagined. When danger crept into her home in the darkness, the one who stood between her and disaster wasn't who you'd expect. This is a story about trust, instinct, and a bond that defied all logic. Before you watch, remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss another touching story like this one, and write in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. The bobcat stood frozen in the hallway, ears pressed flat against his head, eyes locked on something in the darkness. He hadn't moved in 3 minutes. And Sarah, barely awake, barefoot in the doorway of her bedroom, couldn't understand why her heart was pounding before she even knew what scared her. 12 hours before, none of this seemed possible. Morning sunlight had streamed through the kitchen windows in soft golden stripes, catching tiny dust particles that floated slowly and peacefully. Shadow sat on the counter, a spot he wasn't allowed to be, but always was, his tan coat shining copper in the sunlight. 60 pounds of wild strength wrapped in spotted fur. And yet there he was, carefully licking yogurt from Sarah's spoon like a house cat who'd never experienced hunger or cold. She'd discovered him 4 winters ago, a tiny freezing creature no bigger than her hand, left alone in a pile of snow behind the grocery store. His mother was gone, killed by a car, the vet thought, and his brothers and sisters were already dead. The extreme cold had taken most of his strength. His breathing was so faint she'd thought he was already dead when she scooped him into her jacket. But his heart kept beating, weak, stubborn, refusing to quit. The vet had warned her bobcats don't make good pets, that wild animals belong in nature, that even when raised by hand they're unpredictable, dangerous. Sarah had nodded politely and brought him home anyway. Now 4 years later, Shadow stretched across the counter like he ruled it. One paw hanging over the side, eyes half shut in happiness. He chirped, a soft, throaty sound that bobcats make when they're content, and bumped his wide head against her wrist. His whiskers brushed her skin. She smiled in spite of herself. "You're spoiled, you know that," she whispered, scratching behind his tufted ears. He purred deep and rumbling like far-off thunder. People didn't get it. They saw the pictures she shared online and called her careless, stupid. They said she was taking a huge risk, keeping a predator in her house. But those people had never seen the way Shadow curled against her on the sofa during storms, his weight a warm comfort against her chest. They'd never felt the gentleness in his paws when he touched her face, claws kept carefully hidden. They'd never heard him meow, soft and sad, when she came home late, as if he'd been concerned. He wasn't a pet. She understood that. He was something completely different. A companion, a partnership, a wild soul choosing every single day to remain. The house was silent that morning. Too silent, perhaps. But Sarah had gotten used to the quietness. She'd lived by herself for 6 years now. Since Michael left, since the children moved away, since the divorce documents dried and the settlement money cleared, and the life she'd created for 30 years collapsed like a house of cards. The emptiness had been crushing at first. Now it was just normal. Shadow had helped fill some of that void. Not all of it, but enough. She poured herself coffee, black and strong, and watched him clean his paws with careful attention. His pupils were large despite the light, and his tail, thick and banded, flicked once, twice, in a pattern she couldn't quite understand. "You're acting strange today," she said casually. He didn't reply, just kept licking between his toes, methodical and far away. The day progressed in normal patterns. Laundry, a phone call with her daughter that went to voicemail. By evening, the house had fallen into its usual calmness. Sarah made dinner, leftover chicken for her, raw turkey for Shadow, and they ate together in the fading light. He sat next to her chair, chewing slowly, eyes sometimes glancing toward the hallway. She noticed, but didn't worry about it. Bobcats were watchful by nature, always observing, always listening. After dinner, she went through the house, closing windows, switching off lights. The back door, the one that opened to the small fenced yard, stuck a little when she pulled it closed. She wiggled the handle, thought it latched, and continued on. She didn't check the lock. Later, she'd recall that moment with terrible clarity, the careless ease, the belief that nothing dangerous could happen here in this peaceful neighborhood, in this normal house. By 10 o'clock, She was in bed, leaning against pillows, scrolling through her phone with distracted eyes. Shadow was curled at the end of the mattress. His body a heavy, warm weight against her legs. His breathing was even, his ears twitched sometimes, following sounds she couldn't hear. She fell asleep somewhere around 11. The phone still glowing dimly in her hand. She didn't know what time it was when Shadow moved. No noise, no alert, just the sudden loss of his weight, the mattress shifting as he slipped quietly to the floor. Sarah stirred, half asleep, and reached for him automatically. Her hand found only empty air. She opened her eyes. The bedroom was dark, but the hallway beyond glowed softly from the nightlight she kept plugged in near the bathroom. And there, outlined in the doorway, completely still, was Shadow. His body was low, tense. Every muscle coiled tight under his fur. His ears were pressed flat and his tail hung low, barely moving. He was staring at something she couldn't see. Sarah sat up slowly, heart suddenly loud in her ears. "Shadow," she whispered. He didn't turn, didn't blink, just stared into the dark hallway with a focus that made her skin crawl. And then she heard it, faint, almost nothing. The soft creak of a floorboard pressing under weight. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, stuck somewhere between her lungs and her mouth. She sat frozen in bed, every nerve suddenly alert, listening to the silence that followed the creak. The house made noises at night. She knew this. Old wood settling, the heater turning on, pipes expanding and shrinking with temperature changes. This was different. This noise had weight behind it. Shadow remained frozen in the doorway, a statue carved from tension and instinct. His tail had gone completely still. In the dim glow of the hallway nightlight, she could see the muscles in his shoulders bunched tight, his head lowered slightly, chin almost touching the floor. It was a position she'd never seen before. Hunting, patient, waiting. She reached slowly for her phone on the nightstand, fingers shaking so badly she nearly knocked it to the floor. The screen lit up, painfully bright in the darkness, and she quickly dimmed it, squinting at the time. 2:47 a.m. The numbers felt ridiculous, unreal. Another noise, quieter this time, like fabric brushing against a wall. It came from downstairs. The kitchen maybe, or the living room. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, each one more frightening than the last. A raccoon that had somehow gotten inside. A branch scraping against the window. The wind. It had to be the wind. Except there was no wind tonight. The air outside had been perfectly calm when she'd closed the windows. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, bare feet touching the cold wood floor. The chill traveled up through her soles, sharpening her awareness. She stood slowly, careful not to make any noise, and took a single step toward the doorway. Shadow's ears turned backward, following her movement, but his eyes never left whatever he was watching in the darkness below. His lips pulled back slightly. Not a snarl, not yet. Just the smallest hint of teeth, a warning written in muscle memory and wild instinct. She stopped beside him, one hand reaching down to touch the thick fur between his shoulder blades. His body was stiff beneath her hand, shaking with barely held energy. She could feel his heartbeat, fast, steady, deliberate. The stairs went down directly across from her bedroom door, leading down to the main floor where the kitchen opened into the living room. From where she stood, she could see the top 3 steps, lit by the nightlight's soft glow. Beyond that, only darkness. And then in that darkness, something moved. A shadow separate from the other shadows. Standing where it should have been lying down, moving when everything else was still. Sarah's heart stopped. There was someone in her house. The understanding hit her like freezing water. Shocking and complete. Her hand flew to her mouth, blocking the gasp that tried to escape. Her other hand gripped Shadow's fur, fingers digging into his coat. He didn't react to her touch, didn't even seem to notice. All his focus was aimed downward, following the intruder's movements with the eerie stillness of a hunter watching prey. She fumbled with her phone, hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped it twice. She pulled up the emergency call screen, her thumb hovering over the 9, but she hesitated. What if she was wrong? What if it was nothing? A trick of light and shadow and an overactive imagination fueled by too many crime documentaries? What if she called the police and they arrived to find an empty house and a scared woman who'd panicked over her own reflection? Then she heard the dishes, the soft clink of ceramic touching ceramic, the faint scrape of something being moved across the counter. Someone was in her kitchen, going through her cabinets, touching her belongings. She pressed 911 and lifted the phone to her ear, her hand shaking so badly the phone rattled against her head. One ring, two. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, professional, grounded in a reality that felt very distant from this dark hallway and the shadow moving below. Someone's in my house, Sarah whispered, the words barely audible even to herself. I'm upstairs. They're in the kitchen. I can hear them. Are you in a safe location? Can you lock yourself in a room? I'm in the bedroom doorway. She stopped, unsure how to explain. I have a bobcat. He's with me. The pause. Ma'am, did you say a bobcat? Yes, he sensed something before I did. He's watching the stairs. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, stay where you are. Stay quiet. Units are being sent to your location now. Do not confront the intruder. Do you understand? Yes. Stay on the line with me. Sarah pressed herself against the door frame. Phone clutched to her ear, eyes fixed on the darkness below. Shadow hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. He was a coiled spring, waiting for the right moment to release. Minutes passed like hours. The dispatcher's voice murmured in her ear, asking questions she barely heard, offering comfort that felt empty. The sirens were coming. Help was on the way. Just stay calm. Stay quiet. But then the shadow moved again. Closer this time, to the bottom of the stairs. Sarah's breath stopped. The figure paused there, partially visible now in the spill of light from upstairs. She could make out the shape of a person, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothes and something over their face, a mask or a hood. They were looking at something in their hands. Her laptop, she realized with a sickening jolt. They were holding her laptop. The intruder took one step onto the stairs, then another, climbing toward her. Shadow's body shifted, barely noticeable. Just the slightest change of weight, muscles gathering, back legs lowering a fraction of an inch. The intruder climbed another step, then froze. They'd seen him. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The intruder stood 3 steps up, laptop clutched to their chest. Shadow crouched in the hallway above, eyes glowing gold in the dim light. Sarah pressed against the wall, phone still at her ear, the dispatcher's voice asking, Ma'am, are you still there? The intruder took a step backward, and Shadow made a sound. Not a meow, not a hiss, something deeper, older. A sound that came from somewhere primitive and untamed. A sound that belonged to dark forests and moonless nights, and the sharp edge of survival. A growl that rose from his chest like far-off thunder, building slowly into something that shook the air itself. The laptop slipped from the intruder's hands and crashed down the stairs, plastic cracking against wood. The laptop tumbled down the stairs in a cascading clatter of breaking plastic and shattering glass. Each impact echoing through the house like gunshots. It came to rest at the bottom, screen flickering once before going dark. The intruder stumbled backward, catching himself on the railing. And in that moment of chaos, Sarah saw his eyes through the gap in his mask. Wide, white-rimmed, flooded with panic. He hadn't expected resistance. Certainly hadn't expected this. Shadow took one deliberate step forward, placing his front paw on the top stair. The movement was slow, calculated. Every muscle in his body was visible beneath his fur, coiled and ready. His ears remained flat against his head, and his tail, thick as a man's wrist, hung low, tip barely twitching. The growl continued, a continuous rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards themselves. The intruder backed down another step, hands raised slightly, palms out. Okay, he said, voice muffled behind the mask. Okay, easy. Shadow's growl deepened. Sarah stood frozen against the door frame, phone still pressed to her ear. The dispatcher's voice had become urgent. Ma'am, I need you to stay back. Do not engage. Officers are 3 minutes away. Do you hear the sirens yet? She listened beneath the pounding of her own heartbeat. Beneath Shadow's growl, she could hear them, faint but growing louder. The high-pitched wail of rescue approaching through empty streets. The intruder heard them too. His head jerked toward the front of the house, then back to Shadow, then toward the kitchen. He was thinking, looking for an exit. The back door, the one she'd forgotten to lock, would be his best choice. But to reach it, he'd have to go through the kitchen. And the kitchen meant turning his back on the stairs, on Shadow. "What is that thing?" the intruder breathed, more to himself than anyone else. His voice carried the clear edge of someone whose reality had just shifted sideways. Shadow took another step down, then another. His movements were unhurried, almost casual, but there was nothing relaxed about his stance. He was descending the stairs with the measured precision of an apex predator closing distance on prey. His eyes, bright gold in the dim light, never left the intruder's face. "Ma'am, is the intruder still in the house?" The dispatcher's voice cut through the haze of adrenaline. "Yes," Sarah whispered. "He's on the stairs. But Shadow is between us." She didn't know how to finish that sentence. What was Shadow doing? Protecting her? Hunting? Both? "Officers are 1 minute out. Stay where you are." The intruder took another step backward, foot searching for purchase on the stair behind him. He missed the edge and nearly fell, catching himself at the last second with a desperate grab at the railing. The motion was too sudden, too aggressive. Shadow exploded into motion. Not an attack, not quite, but a charge that closed half the distance between them in a single leap. He landed on the middle stair with a heavy thud, body low, and released a sound that made Sarah's blood turn to ice. It was a scream, guttural and raw and impossibly loud, the kind of vocalization that bobcats make in the wild when defending territory or warning off threats. It filled the entire house, bouncing off walls, rattling windows. The intruder fell backward, landing hard on his tailbone at the bottom of the stairs. He scrambled to get his feet under him, breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Shadow stopped. Just stopped. Halfway down the staircase. Body still coiled. Mouth slightly open, revealing sharp white teeth. But he didn't advance. Didn't retreat. Just held his position. Eyes locked on the man below. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the scream. Sarah could hear everything now. The intruder's ragged breathing. The distant sirens growing closer. Her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The soft creak of the house settling. And underneath it all, a low rumbling purr from Shadow. Not contentment, but something else, a warning, a promise. The intruder got to his feet slowly, hands still raised, back pressed against the wall. "Okay," he said again, voice shaking now. "Okay, I'm leaving. I'm going to go." He took a careful step sideways toward the kitchen. Shadow's head tracked the movement, but his body remained still. Another step, then another. The intruder was almost to the kitchen doorway now, almost to freedom, his eyes never leaving the bobcat on the stairs. And then Shadow did something completely unexpected. He sat down, just sat right there on the stairs, back legs folding beneath him, tail curling around his paws. The aggressive stance melted into something almost casual. He yawned, a huge jaw-cracking yawn that displayed every tooth in his mouth, and then looked away from the intruder entirely, his attention shifting to the living room where his food bowl sat on its mat beside the couch. Sarah felt her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The tension in the air hadn't lessened. If anything, it had increased, but Shadow's body language had completely changed. He looked bored, disinterested. The intruder seemed just as confused. He stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, watching the bobcat with cautious disbelief. Then Shadow stood, stretched lazily, front paws extended, back arched, tail straight up, and patted down the remaining stairs with unhurried grace. He walked past the intruder without even glancing at him, crossed the living room, and sat down in front of his food bowl and began to eat loudly, deliberately, crunching through the raw turkey pieces she'd left for him earlier. As if there wasn't a terrified burglar standing 10 feet away, as if the house wasn't about to be swarmed by police, as if this was just another normal night. The absurdity of it hit Sarah like a physical force. A laugh bubbled up in her throat, hysterical and inappropriate and impossible to contain. She clapped her hand over her mouth, shoulders shaking. The intruder stared at the bobcat, then at her, then back at the bobcat. Is he eating? Ma'am? The dispatcher's voice was sharp now. Ma'am, what's happening? Are you okay? He's eating, Sarah said, the words tumbling out between gasps of laughter and tears. My bobcat is eating his dinner. The guy is still here and Shadow is he's just eating. The sirens were right outside now, filling the night with noise and flashing lights. Red and blue strobed through the front windows, painting the walls in alternating colors. The intruder's head whipped toward the door, then back to Shadow, panic returning to his eyes. He took a step toward the back door. Shadow's head snapped up from his bowl. The change was instant. The casual domesticity vanished, replaced once again by predatory focus. He didn't stand, didn't need to, just lifted his head, ears forward now, eyes locked on the intruder and released a hiss that sounded like tearing fabric. The intruder froze mid-step. Shadow took a single step away from his bowl, placed himself between the intruder and the back door. His tail puffed to twice its normal size, and the fur along his spine stood straight up, making him look impossibly large in the dim kitchen light. Don't. Sarah found herself saying, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the intruder or to Shadow. Just don't move. The intruder didn't move. Couldn't move, maybe. His body had gone rigid, trapped between the front door where police were now pounding. Police, open the door, and the back door where a 60-pound wild cat stood guard. Shadow took another step forward, then another. Stalking now, head low. Each paw placed with absolute precision. The hiss had stopped, but something worse had replaced it. A silence so heavy it felt like pressure against Sarah's eardrums. The front door rattled under heavy impacts. This is the police. We're coming in. The intruder made his choice. He lunged for the back door, hands reaching for the handle. Shadow launched himself across the remaining distance in a blur of spotted fur and coiled muscle. He didn't bite, didn't scratch, just collided with the man's legs with his full weight and momentum and released a scream that would have been at home in the deepest wilderness. The intruder went down hard, crashing into a stack of storage boxes Sarah kept by the door. Cardboard exploded. Old winter clothes spilling across the floor. He thrashed, trying to get his feet under him. Hands scrabbling at the boxes. The front door burst open. Heavy footsteps thundered into the house. Police, show me your hands. Shadow bounded away from the fallen intruder, putting distance between them, and retreated to the bottom of the stairs. He sat down again, casual, composed, and began grooming his shoulder as if nothing remarkable had just happened. 2 officers rushed into the kitchen, weapons drawn, flashlights cutting through the darkness. They found the intruder struggling to extract himself from the pile of boxes and clothes, mask askew, breathing hard. Hands, let me see your hands. The intruder complied, arms shooting up, defeat written in every line of his body. One officer approached cautiously, weapon trained on the man while the second swept the room with his flashlight. The beam landed on Shadow, still sitting calmly on the stairs, licking his paw. The officer's flashlight paused, moved back, focused on Shadow. What the? He turned to his partner. Tom, is that a bobcat? The first officer glanced over mid-cuff, stopped, stared. Ma'am, he called up the stairs. Ma'am, is that your bobcat? Sarah finally moved from the doorway, legs shaking so badly she had to grip the railing as she descended the stairs. She stepped carefully around Shadow, who watched her pass with calm golden eyes, and made her way to the kitchen where the officers had the intruder pressed face down on the floor. Yes, she said, voice barely steady. That's Shadow. He's mine. I rescued him as a cub. The second officer, Tom, holstered his weapon and stared at Shadow with open amazement. Ma'am, that's the scariest security system I've ever seen. And just like that, the tension broke. Sarah felt the laugh escape again, tears streaming down her face now, relief and terror and exhaustion all tangled together. She sank down onto the bottom stair, legs giving out completely, and buried her face in her hands. More officers were arriving now. Questions were being asked. The intruder was being read his rights, hauled to his feet, walked toward the front door in handcuffs. Someone brought her a glass of water. Someone else asked if she needed medical attention. Through it all, Shadow sat beside her on the stairs, his warm, solid weight pressing against her hip. When she reached out to touch him, her hand trembling, he leaned into her palm and released that soft chirping trill, the sound of contentment, of safety, of home. The house felt strange with so many people in it. Foreign. Sarah had lived alone for so long that the presence of 4 police officers moving through her rooms, photographing evidence, taking statements, dusting for fingerprints, it all felt like watching someone else's life unfold in her space. She sat at the kitchen table, blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the fact that she wasn't cold, watching them work with a kind of distant fascination. The intruder was gone, loaded into a patrol car 20 minutes ago, head down, hands cuffed behind his back. She'd gotten only a brief glimpse of his face when they'd removed the mask, younger than she'd expected, maybe early 20s, with scared eyes and a thin face that made him look even younger. Not the hardened criminal her imagination had created, just a kid who'd made a terrible choice and found himself facing something he couldn't have anticipated. Officer Tom, she'd learned his name was Tom Bradley, 14 years on the force, father of 2, sat across from her now, notepad open, pen poised. He'd been kind, patient, walked her through the timeline 3 times now, asking the same questions in slightly different ways, making sure he had everything documented correctly. And you said the Bobcat positioned himself between you and the suspect before you even realized someone was in the house, Tom asked, reviewing his notes. Sarah nodded, hands wrapped around a mug of tea someone had made for her. She hadn't taken a single sip. I woke up and he was already in the doorway. Just standing there, staring into the dark. He knew before I did. Tom glanced over at Shadow, who had claimed his favorite spot on the couch and was currently sprawled across the cushions, one leg extended in the air as he groomed his inner thigh with single-minded focus. The picture of feline indifference. How long have you had him? 4 years, almost exactly. I found him in January during that bad freeze we had. His mother was hit by a car. He was maybe 6 weeks old. Hypothermic. The vet didn't think he'd survive the night. She paused, remembering the tiny shivering body wrapped in towels. The way she'd held him against her chest all night, willing her body heat into his. The moment at dawn when he'd finally opened his eyes and looked at her. But he did survive and he just stayed. Does he usually react to strangers, show aggression? Never. Not once in 4 years. He's cautious around new people, but he's never been aggressive, never growled, never hissed. I've had friends over, repair people, delivery drivers. He just watches from a distance. Curious but not confrontational. She looked over at Shadow, who had finished grooming and was now watching the officers with lazy interest. Tonight was different. Tom nodded, made a note. The suspect, his name is Ryan Carter, by the way. He's already talking, says he chose your house because it looked empty. No car in the driveway. Most of the lights off. He didn't expect anyone to be home. My car's in the shop, Sarah said quietly. Has been for 3 days. Lucky timing then. In a way of speaking. Tom closed his notepad, leaned back in his chair. Sarah, I've been doing this job for a long time. Seen a lot of break-ins. Usually ends one of 2 ways. Either the homeowner doesn't wake up and loses their valuables. Or they do wake up and things get violent. What happened here tonight? He shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. I've never seen anything like it. That animal of yours, he didn't attack. Didn't need to. Just his presence was enough. The threat of what he could do. He was protecting me, Sarah said. And even as she said it, the weight of it settled over her. Shadow had protected her. Not through violence or aggression, but through something deeper, more primal. The simple, unmistakable reality of what he was, a wild predator choosing to stand between danger and someone he loved. Yes, ma'am, he absolutely was. Tom stood, tucked his notepad into his pocket. We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to sign your statement, and we'll need documentation for the Bobcat, permits, veterinary records, proof that he's legally yours. This is going to generate some attention once word gets out. Sarah's stomach tightened. She hadn't thought about that. The attention, The questions, the inevitable scrutiny that would come from people who didn't understand, who would see only danger where she saw family. Tom must have read her expression because his voice softened. For what it's worth, what I'm going to write in my report is that your animal likely saved your life tonight. Ryan Carter had a knife on him. We found it in his pocket. If he'd gotten upstairs. If he'd reached your bedroom. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Sarah's hands tightened around the mug. The other officers finished their work over the next 30 minutes. Photographs taken, evidence collected, the broken laptop bagged and tagged, the back door examined and properly secured. They left one by one, each offering reassurances, phone numbers, resources for victim support services. Tom was the last to leave. Get some rest, he said at the door, and maybe give that Bobcat an extra treat tonight. He earned it. Then she was alone again. The house settling back into its familiar silence. But it felt different now, smaller somehow, more fragile. The illusion of safety she'd built here had been shattered, and she wasn't sure how to piece it back together. She locked the front door, checked it twice, went to the back door, and tested the handle 3 times, making sure the deadbolt was properly engaged. Then she stood in the kitchen surrounded by the remnants of chaos. Scattered clothes, collapsed boxes. Her food bowl knocked askew and felt the weight of the night finally crash over her. Her legs gave out. She sank down onto the floor, back against the cabinet, and let herself cry. Really cry. All the fear she'd held back. All the adrenaline that had kept her functioning. All the what-ifs and could-have-beens. They poured out in great shaking sobs that left her gasping. She didn't hear Shadow approach, didn't realize he was there until she felt his weight against her side, warm and solid and real. He pressed his head under her chin, that broad skull fitting perfectly into the curve of her neck, and began to purr, not the warning rumble from earlier, but the deep, rhythmic vibration of contentment, of comfort. She wrapped her arms around him, fingers digging into his thick fur, and held on. He allowed it, stayed perfectly still, bearing her weight, absorbing her tears into his coat. "You saved me," she whispered into his fur. "You knew somehow. You knew." He chirped softly, a questioning sound, and shifted his weight so she could hold him more comfortably. They sat like that for a long time, minutes or hours. Sarah couldn't say. The house was silent except for their breathing, synchronized now, falling into the same rhythm they'd shared for 4 years of sleeping in the same bed, eating meals side by side, existing in the comfortable intimacy of chosen family. Eventually, she found the strength to stand. Her legs were stiff, her back aching from sitting on the hard floor. Shadow followed her as she moved through the house, turning off lights, checking locks one more time, climbing the stairs to her bedroom. He didn't leave her side, stayed close enough that she could feel the brush of his fur against her leg with every step. In the bedroom, she changed into clean pajamas with trembling hands. The clothes she'd been wearing, her old t-shirt and cotton shorts, were damp with sweat and tears. She threw them in the hamper and pulled on something fresh, something that didn't carry the smell of fear. When she climbed into bed, Shadow jumped up beside her. But instead of settling at the foot of the mattress like he usually did, he moved up higher, positioning himself between her and the bedroom door, the same place he'd been when she first woke, guarding the entrance, watching. She reached out to stroke his head, and he leaned into her touch, eyes half closing. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "How did you know before I did?" He didn't answer, of course, just continued purring, a sound like distant machinery, steady and eternal. But as she lay there in the dark, hand resting on his warm flank, feeling his breathing, his presence, his absolute certainty of purpose, she began to understand. Shadow hadn't just sensed danger tonight. He'd sensed it long before. All those times she dismissed his behavior as weird or quirky. His reluctance to go upstairs earlier in the evening. His repeated glances toward the back of the house. The tension in his body during dinner. He'd known something was wrong. Had been trying to tell her in the only way he could. Wild animals don't lose their instincts just because they live in houses. They don't forget how to read the world just because humans can't see what they see. Shadow had been listening to signals she couldn't hear. Reading signs she couldn't detect, understanding on a level that her domesticated senses had long since abandoned. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from her daughter, finally calling back. "Mom, just saw your message. Are you okay? Call me." Sarah typed out a quick response. "I'm fine. Long story. I'll call tomorrow. Shadow protected me tonight. He's a hero." The response came immediately. "Call me as soon as you can. Love you." "Love you too." She set the phone down and turned onto her side, facing Shadow. His eyes were open now, glowing faintly in the darkness, watching her with that unblinking golden stare that had once unnerved her and now brought only comfort. "I know what people will say," she told him quietly. "They'll say I got lucky, that you could have hurt me just as easily as you hurt him. That wild animals are unpredictable, dangerous." She reached out, traced the distinctive spotted pattern on his shoulder. "But they don't understand. You're not tame, and I never wanted you to be. You're wild. You've always been wild. But wild doesn't mean violent. It doesn't mean cruel. It just means real, honest, uncomplicated by the things humans complicate." Shadow blinked slowly. A cat's kiss, a gesture of trust and affection. "You didn't attack him," she continued, working through the realization even as she spoke it. "You could have. You're more than capable, but you didn't. You just showed him what you were. Let him see the predator. Let him understand that he'd made a mistake coming into your territory, threatening your person, and that was enough." She thought about the intruder. Ryan Carter, Tom had said, 20-something, scared, probably desperate. She wondered what circumstances had led him to her door. What choices had brought him to that moment of breaking into a stranger's home. She didn't forgive him, couldn't, but she found herself hoping he'd learn something tonight beyond just fear. Maybe he'd learned about consequences, about the fact that some boundaries once crossed can't be uncrossed. Outside, the neighborhood was settling back into sleep. The patrol cars were gone. The flashing lights extinguished. The world returning to its ordinary rhythms as if nothing remarkable had happened. But something had happened. Something profound. Sarah had been saved. But more than that, she'd been seen, protected, chosen by a creature who owed her nothing, who could leave any time he wanted, who stayed not because he was trained or leashed or obligated, but because he wanted to. Because 4 years ago she'd chosen him, and tonight he'd chosen her back. "Thank you," she whispered, fingers still tangled in his fur. "For staying, for protecting me, for being exactly what you are." Shadow's purr deepened and he shifted closer, pressing the full weight of his body against hers. Warm, solid, safe. She closed her eyes and for the first time since waking to find him in the doorway, she felt herself relax. The fear was still there, would probably be there for a long time. But beneath it, stronger than it, was something else. Gratitude, wonder, the bone-deep knowledge that she wasn't alone. Maybe wild hearts don't need taming. Maybe they just need to be understood, respected, allowed to be what they are without apology or explanation. And maybe sometimes that's enough. Maybe that's everything. She drifted off to sleep with Shadow beside her. His breathing matching hers. His presence a promise that no darkness, no matter how deep, would find her undefended. The house was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet now. A protected quiet, a chosen quiet. Did you enjoy this story? If a wild animal you rescued stood between you and an intruder, would you trust it to save you? Yes or no? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.